Welcome back to the channel, where everyday stories unfold like action blockbusters right in the middle of your neighborhood. Today, you'll witness a man go head-to-head with a fake HOA, a Karen who thinks she is the law, and a drawbridge that becomes a symbol of justice. If you've ever been a victim of power abuse or faced ridiculous rules, watch until the end. And don't forget to comment below. What would you do if a Karen built a fence in front of your house? We read every single comment. That Saturday morning started like any other until the roar of a diesel engine echoed right outside my front gate. I stepped onto the porch, coffee still steaming in my hand, and saw Karen Winters orchestrating a group of workers putting up barricades directly across my driveway. No warning, no notice from the local authorities. Just Karen with her clipboard and that smug look in her eyes like she was invading Normandy, not a quiet suburban neighborhood. "We're implementing a community traffic adjustment," Karen said, her tone as flat as a pre-recorded voicemail. I looked down at the metal fence being welded inches from my gate, then up at the temporary sign, Restricted Access Zone, Common Pathway Construction under HOA Directive. Common pathway? I'd lived here for 8 years. That driveway was poured with my own money, fully within the boundaries of my deeded private property. There was nothing common about it, except for Karen's nerve. I stepped off the porch, brushed the sign aside, and asked directly, "Karen, what gives you the right to do this?" She adjusted her sunglasses and gave a condescending smirk, like I'd just told a bad joke. "Blake, maybe you should review Section 4.3 of the HOA bylaws, pertaining to infrastructure restructuring when deemed necessary." Oh, I'd read it, memorized every word. There wasn't a single clause that allowed a self-appointed HOA president to erect barriers on private land. But Karen didn't need the law. She just needed someone too afraid to push back. The workers, clearly hired from some shady contractor, kept working, paid well to ask no questions. I spotted a glossy black SUV parked across the street. Karen had brought a whole crew. One of them began placing orange cones along the driveway like it was a scene from the HOA Strikes Back. I clenched my coffee mug tighter. This wasn't about a driveway anymore. It was about who really held power in this neighborhood. Karen thought that by throwing up fences and citing community safety, she could control me the way she'd intimidated others on the block. But she forgot one thing. I'm not the kind of man who nods just to avoid trouble. I am the trouble. As I walked back inside and slammed the door behind me, I'd already made up my mind. If Karen wanted a game of control, I'd show her what an unbreakable strategy looks like. Because I don't just have the land, I have zoning maps, I have municipal codes, and I have something Karen's never dealt with before, an opponent who doesn't back down. 3 days after the barricade incident, Karen came back, this time without a truck or construction crew. Just a silver Prius creeping down the street like she was afraid of scratching her ego. In her hand was the familiar clipboard, now twice as thick. Every time I saw it, I couldn't help but wonder, does Karen actually categorize her schemes by index tabs? It was 6 a.m. The morning fog still clung to the neighborhood, but there she stood, right at the edge of my driveway, like a statue guarding sacred ground. I opened the door, still half asleep, just in time to hear a clack. A fake citation had been slapped onto my windshield. Bold red capital letters screamed, "Violation, obstruction of common access. Repeat offense will be reported to the committee." Committee? I'd lived here for 8 years and had never seen a committee besides Karen and her oversized shadow. I stepped out. "Karen." She didn't turn around. I said louder, "Karen, I'll ask again. What exactly are you trying to accomplish?" She turned, smiling a smile that could blot the sun from the sky. "Maintaining community order, Blake. You're obstructing the flow of traffic. That's a violation of Clause 3.5. I raised an eyebrow. Clause 3.5? Driveways may be reclassified as shared zones if parking demand exceeds threshold. There is no Clause 3.5 in the bylaws. I checked. Karen froze for half a second. A small crease appeared between her meticulously painted eyebrows. "You think this is some kind of joke?" "No," I replied, stepping in close, "but you're about to find out how serious I play." That night, I turned my house into a command center. 5 browser tabs open on my laptop. Urban zoning laws, HOA bylaws, property deeds, GIS land maps, and a scanned copy of my original purchase agreement. I wasn't just looking for loopholes. I was hunting the roots of every lie. Every line I read was another bullet for the battle ahead. And the deeper I went, the more I realized Karen had nothing but confidence and a pile of cheap tricks. She didn't rely on law. She relied on fear. Friday morning, I headed outside early. There it was, Karen's folding chair on the sidewalk, like she was camping on my land. Next to it, a fresh orange traffic cone with a sign taped to it, "Shared Access Zone. Violators will be prosecuted." I didn't say a word. I brought out the stack of documents I'd spent the week compiling. Included were, C, a land survey confirming boundary lines, an official statement from the county assessor, and this, bolded, "The HOA has no jurisdiction over any area fully encompassed within private property lines." I stood in front of Karen. "You're standing on my land." "No, I'm protecting shared community property." "And now I'm ending this circus." I held up the stack. Karen went pale. Her sunglasses couldn't hide the furrowed brow or the trembling hands trying to keep her clipboard from slipping. "Blake, don't think this ends here." "I don't think. I know." I walked back into my house. Behind me, I heard the sound of a folding chair dragging across the pavement, Karen retreating. But I knew she wasn't done. This war had just begun. 1 week after the showdown that was tighter than a drawn bowstring, I completed my masterpiece, a structure not built out of anger, but with precision, intent, and the spirit of engineer-certified retaliation. I called it Project Avalon. But the neighbors, they called it the Dragon Bridge that slayed the HOA. Nestled neatly into my former driveway was a full-on anti-intrusion trench, nearly 3 feet deep, lined with skid-proof stone, and topped with a hydraulic drawbridge that could rise in 12 seconds and lower in 8. I added LED lights along the edge and installed a motion sensor that triggered music whenever someone approached. Also, Sprach Zarathustra, if you're wondering how dramatic this thing really was. And on Sunday morning, I decided to unveil it. Kids from the neighborhood came running like it was a holiday parade. Mason, the comic book nerd next door, whispered to his friend, "It's gotta be the entrance to a secret bunker." I leaned over, eyes locked on the control lever. "No, kid, it's just here to keep Karen out." Click. The engine purred. The bridge split and descended with theatrical grace. Lights blinked. A few kids clapped. The elderly lady from house number 14 pulled out her phone to record, and across the street stood Karen Winters, frozen, like she belonged in Madame Tussauds. She wore a white blouse, high heels, and, of course, sunglasses and that ever-present clipboard. But this time, her gaze held no disdain, only sheer panic. I waved. Karen didn't respond. She turned, walking back to her house like retreating into a fortress that had just been breached. But I knew Karen wouldn't stay silent for long. 2 days later, a manila envelope showed up in my mailbox, stamped in bold, HOA, Aesthetic Review Committee, a name more made up than the Neighborhood Budget Alliance. Inside, in red ink like a detective movie ransom note, the handwritten message read, "Your medieval-style drawbridge is causing significant visual disruption to the neighborhood. Please dismantle it within 72 hours or face enforcement." Signed, Karen Winters, Chairwoman of Visual Initiatives. I laughed so hard I spilled my coffee. Visual Initiatives. What's next? Accusing me of summoning dragons from the moat? The next day, while checking the hydraulic system, I heard a shout from across the street. "You think this is funny?" Karen stormed over like she was ready to declare war. I said nothing, just pressed the button. The drawbridge lowered slowly with a gentle hum. Kids clapped again. A neighbor snapped photos. Karen stood motionless, lips tight. "This is a violation," she screamed. "Not at all," I replied, pulling out the stack of papers. "Building permits, city approval, engineering report, everything's legal. Want to see?" Karen's face turned crimson. "You're destroying the community," she snapped. "Me?" I pointed toward the neighbors live streaming on Facebook. "They look pretty devastated, don't they?" Karen turned and walked away, but I knew she'd be back. The difference now? Every eye in the neighborhood was on me. and no one feared her clipboard anymore. I used to think Karen would stop after the entire neighborhood laughed at the drawbridge. I was naive. For someone like Karen Winters, every failure isn't the end. It's fuel for the next chapter, stranger, more dramatic, and more alarming. Tuesday morning, I went to get the mail like usual. Inside the box was an overstuffed envelope bearing the HOA logo, clearly printed on a home inkjet. The ink was still smudged. Inside was a 3-page report stating, "Jury, individual named Blake Morgan has constructed a mechanical structure that poses a visual disturbance, endangers child safety, and disrupts the community's aesthetic identity." At the bottom, a handwritten line in red ink, italicized, "This action may constitute urban habitat sabotage." I sat down on the porch step and laughed like a man slightly unhinged. Urban habitat? I live in a peaceful suburban neighborhood, not Central Park, Manhattan. But Karen, in all her alarmingly creative glory, had now turned the drawbridge into the symbol of aesthetic depravity. And she didn't stop at mail. The next day, I found flyers scattered in front of every house. Bold red letters screamed, "Danger! Medieval war trench in your neighborhood." The flyer included a photo of my bridge mid-lift, with a red warning icon featuring a skull and a dragon. I laughed so hard I almost choked. Instead of getting mad, I scanned the flyer, posted it on the neighborhood forum with the caption, "It's a driveway bridge, not a catapult base, but thanks to Karen for making it legendary." The post spread like wildfire. Neighbors flooded the thread with memes, parody videos, and photoshopped images of Karen in a knight's armor. I didn't retaliate with words. I just tossed more logs onto the right fire. And like an uncontrollable chain reaction, Karen started unraveling. She erected a massive sign in her yard with bloody red letters, "Danger zone. Do not stay silent in the face of neighbor violence." I tilted my head from the balcony. It looked more like a summer theater prop than a statement of protest. Neighbors came by to take pictures. Kids ran around screaming, "Where's the dragon?" And me. I simply lowered the drawbridge with a smooth whoosh, drove out, and waved to Karen, who stood frozen like a statue, with a face caught somewhere between rage and shame. But then, Karen deployed her strongest psychological weapon. She called the city inspector. That afternoon, a city vehicle parked right in front of my house. A well-dressed inspector stepped out, clipboard in hand, and unsurprisingly, Karen trailed behind like a living shadow. "We've received a report of a potentially hazardous structure," he said calmly. I didn't bother asking who reported it. Karen practically raised her hand before he finished speaking. "What would you like to see first?" I asked, then led him around the perimeter of the trench. I opened my documentation vault, building permits, blueprints, approvals from the Public Works Department, certification of noise compliance, every single paper, legal, clear, airtight. After 20 minutes of inspection, measuring, and nodding, the inspector turned to Karen, half amused. "Actually, this is one of the most creative solutions I've seen. There are no violations here." Karen was stunned. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her clipboard trembled slightly in her grip. I stepped forward gently. "Thanks for stopping by. Next time you visit, just ring the bell. I'll lower the bridge for you." I thought the city inspector's visit would be the final blow, enough to paralyze Karen once and for all, but I underestimated her tireless gift for filing complaints. 3 days after the inspection fail, a black SUV pulled up in front of my house. 2 sharply dressed men stepped out, carrying briefcases and wearing name badges. Tracy Nguyen, HOA Governance, George Miller, Compliance Review Officer. These weren't fakes, not some committee Karen made up. This was the real HOA, and judging by the urgency in their posture, you'd think they were responding to an emergency dispatch from the United Nations. Karen was already waiting on her porch, dressed in a sea blue blazer like she was about to give a TEDx talk. The moment she spotted them, she hurried over faster than I'd ever seen, clipboard in hand, words pouring out like a broken dam. "I've warned you multiple times. That mechanical contraption doesn't just lower property values, it violates our collective aesthetic charter. If we don't act now, we'll set a dangerous precedent. A drawbridge today, tomorrow it's a watchtower or a moat full of alligators." Tracy nodded politely, the way a customer service rep nods while someone complains about lukewarm soup. After Karen finished her dramatic monologue, They thanked her and walked straight toward my house. I was ready. A long table was already set up on my porch, like a miniature congressional hearing. Construction permits, mechanical safety certificates, land registry maps. Each document stamped, signed, and accompanied by photos, each one draining just a little more soul from Karen's clipboard. They said nothing during the inspection, just observed, jotted notes, occasionally nodding. After 25 minutes of professional silence, Tracy turned to me. "Mr. Morgan, I have to say this is an impressive structure. No violations whatsoever. In fact," she glanced at George, "it's actually quite creative." George nodded. "I'd argue it enhances the neighborhood's architectural identity, adds character." I didn't speak. I just smiled. But Karen melted under the afternoon sun. "No, this can't be happening. You don't see how dangerous it is? Children could fall in. Neighbors are disturbed. I'm losing sleep." Tracy turned to her, with the tone of a doctor gently delivering unwelcome news. "Ms. Winters, we've reviewed everything. The structure is fully within private property. It doesn't obstruct anything. It doesn't pollute. And there is no clause in our current bylaws prohibiting drawbridges." Karen froze, like someone had hit her mute button. "And one more thing," George added. "You might want to stop sending those fake HOA warning letters. We received copies, and if it continues, we'll have to take internal action." Karen gasped. "You mean I don't have authority?" George exhaled slowly. "You never did." And just like that, Karen's clipboard empire officially collapsed. The two HOA officials left in peace. I saw them off with a handshake and a grin that said, "Thanks for visiting the kingdom of the Drawbridge." Karen, meanwhile, stood frozen on her porch, a living monument to wounded pride. That evening, I lowered the bridge as usual, drove out for groceries. As I passed by her house, I saw her, covering her car with a black tarp, hammering 2 wooden stakes into her yard, and stringing up a banner that read, "Occupied territory, no surrender." I couldn't help but laugh. Karen no longer controlled the HOA, but she was still desperately trying to control the narrative, by casting herself as the victim in a drama no one was watching anymore. Too bad the audience had already moved on to a different stage. I've always believed that if you want to end a war the right way, don't fire the last shot. Let your enemy shoot themselves in the foot. And Karen Winters? She did exactly that, with surgical precision. After the official HOA sided with me, I could have stopped. But I'm not the type to let a neighborhood tyrant slink into the shadows, waiting for a chance to strike back. I needed an ending, decisive, public, and irreversible. And then I remembered. The fake citations, the forged letters, the slanderous flyers, and most importantly, the security cameras pointed at my yard. Something Karen never seemed to consider. I started editing. I reconstructed the entire timeline of our feud. From the first forged ticket taped to my windshield to the laughable accusation of medieval trench warfare. I even included footage of Karen in pajamas sneaking out at 2 a.m. to dump yard debris into my moat like a Cold War spy on a covert op. When I finished, the video clocked in at 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Smooth transitions. Just enough suspenseful music. And the title? From Clipboard to Crisis, the HOA Tragedy of Karen Winters. I posted it on the neighborhood forum. Within 4 hours, it exploded. Over 300 comments. Almost every household chimed in. One neighbor shared how Karen once fined them for planting flowers that clashed with her stucco wall. Another described how she measured grass height with a literal tape measure. Someone printed the video's thumbnail and taped it to their door. A silent warning. No one crosses the moat without respecting the boundary. But I wasn't done. The next morning, I installed a small stone plaque on the sidewalk bordering Karen's property, etched in crisp lettering. Here once stood the threat of a self-appointed HOA, in memory of the fallen logic and lost courtesy. Cemented, permanent. Karen discovered it at 7 a.m. She tried to yank it out. It didn't budge. A neighbor passing by chuckled. Another took a picture, but the real finishing move came at noon. I scheduled a delivery. A sleek black box, labeled Urgent Community Recognition Award, arrived at Karen's doorstep. Inside was a polished brass plaque engraved with, "In honor of Karen Winters, pioneer of HOA chaos, an icon of the fallen clipboard." The delivery driver told me she opened it, read the inscription, and let out a shriek like a demon being splashed with holy water. The door slammed shut with enough force to chip the stucco. Hours later, the occupied territory sign vanished. The red banner, gone. The blinds, pulled tight. No noise, no movement. Karen disappeared from the stage. No more pacing the sidewalk, no more clipboard, no more slow circling Prius. Just silence and the unmistakable weight of defeat. But my drawbridge, it still lowers every day. And every time it does, it's not just a machine. It's a statement, a symbol, a quiet reminder that phony power always collapses, as long as you're willing to stand your ground and play the game better than the ones who wrote the rules. I don't know if Karen left on her own in silence, but I do know this. The law doesn't stay silent, especially when you have hard evidence and an entire community ready to testify. Then came the invitation, delivered to every doorstep in the neighborhood. A special community meeting, formally called by the HOA board. Subject, review of misconduct and legitimacy of HOA member involvement. Location, Community Hall, 7 p.m. The air that evening was thick, like the moments before a public trial. Neighbors lined up, serious faces, quiet handshakes. No one was joking, no one was laughing. Karen's clipboard was no longer a symbol of authority. It was a symbol of a facade that had finally collapsed. Karen arrived 5 minutes late, dressed in all black, hair tied in a tight bun, no makeup. Her eyes didn't avoid contact, but held that final glint of defiance from someone who knows they're about to lose everything. When the chairman, an elder, long-serving member of the HOA, called the meeting to order, all eyes turned to me. I stood, calmly opened my leather case, and pulled out a neatly stacked folder. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, each word deliberate and firm, "I present clear evidence that Ms. Karen Winters has repeatedly impersonated official regulatory authority, issued fraudulent citations, trespassed on private property, spread misinformation to divide the community, and abused the HOA name for personal control." A low murmur spread through the room. I clicked the remote. A video lit up the projector screen. Karen at 2 a.m. in floral pajamas, tossing trash into my moat like a Soviet spy, perfecting her fastball. The room erupted in laughter, but not the board. They watched with cold clarity, the gaze of those once manipulated, now awakened. Karen stood suddenly, voice sharp like a whip. "This is slander. I did everything for this community. I tried to preserve order." The chairman raised a hand. "Ms. Winters, you had no authority to issue citations, no authority to erect barricades, no authority to summon inspectors without board approval, and certainly no authority to dump garbage onto private property." Karen flushed red. "I was just trying to maintain standards." "Standards?" A woman stood from the back row. "You sent me a letter when I planted yellow chrysanthemums, said they were too visually aggressive. You fined my son for leaving his bike on the lawn." An elderly man rose next. "You threatened to sue me because I hung an American flag on a Tuesday. Apparently it wasn't Patriotic Monday on your imaginary HOA calendar." One by one they stood, no longer afraid, no longer silent. Finally, the chairman nodded and declared, "Ms. Karen Winters is hereby permanently removed from all HOA administrative roles. She is fined $2,000 for abuse of authority and dissemination of false information. Additionally, she is required to complete 40 hours of community service within this neighborhood, landscaping, street cleanup, and the very public work she once forbade others from doing." Karen stood frozen. Her clipboard slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a crisp clack. No one clapped, no cheers. Only the heavy silence of justice served. I left the hall under the soft glow of yellow lights, not with joy, but with peace. And Karen? The last time I saw her, she was hunched in front of the community center, raking dead leaves. No longer the commander, just a woman paying the price for power she never truly had. The story between Blake Morgan and Karen Winters is far more than a personal dispute. It is a vivid metaphor for how misguided authority can infiltrate every corner of our daily lives, and how an ordinary person can stand against it with knowledge, patience, and quiet resolve. Karen is not just a character. She represents a type, those who exploit positions, titles, or vague regulations to control others. These self-appointed gatekeepers often hide behind the guise of community, using it to serve personal agendas. And more alarmingly, they often succeed. Not because they're powerful, but because most of us choose silence. Blake embodies the person who dares to question the unquestionable, who double-checks the rules handed down without clarity, and most importantly, who chooses intellect over outrage. He didn't tear down fences, he didn't shout or threaten violence. Instead, he read the bylaws, studied zoning maps, prepared documents, and he built a drawbridge. Not just to keep Karen out, but to inspire a neighborhood to wake up. The message is clear. When one person stands firm, a whole community can awaken. Blake's journey teaches us something crucial. Knowing the law is knowing how to protect yourself. In an age where everything can be interpreted by those in power, understanding the rules is no longer the lawyer's job alone. It's a survival skill for every citizen. And then there's this. Humor and creativity can be powerful forms of resistance. Blake didn't defeat Karen with anger. He dismantled her control with sharp wit and public exposure, stripping her of power in the eyes of her peers. This fight didn't need a megaphone or a stage. It didn't need spectacle. Because not every hero wears a cape. Sometimes they just need a drawbridge and a parcel map. In the real world, this story reminds us, don't accept anything simply because it comes with a title. Don't bow to rules that haven't earned legitimacy. And above all, don't be afraid to be the first person to say no, because you might just be the spark that lights up a community's awakening. If this story made you laugh, reflect, or simply believe that justice can come in the form of a drawbridge, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who's ever had to deal with a Karen in real life. Do you think Blake did the right thing? Do you stand with the community or feel the consequences weren't strong enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, positive or critical, because every voice matters when it comes to change. Thank you for watching until the end.